There are three mistakes that, made in the fall, essentially guarantee a dead hive by winter's end. Not increase the risk or make it more likely, but guarantee it, because each one attacks the exact mechanism a colony depends on to survive the cold. The frustrating part is that all three are completely invisible when you make them. The hive looks fine in October. It looks fine in November. It doesn't stop looking fine until it's already dead, weeks or months after the actual decision that sealed its fate. Here's exactly what they are, why each one is fatal on its own rather than just risky, and what to do instead, starting right now while there's still time. Mistake 1. Judging the colony's mite load by how it looks instead of counting it. This is the foundational mistake, the one that makes the other two possible, because if you catch this one, you often catch the others in the process of fixing it. Here's why it's fatal and not just risky. Varroa mites peak in population during exactly this window, late summer into fall, for a specific biological reason. All season, the mite population has been climbing steadily, roughly tripling every month, while the bee population grew fast enough to dilute the ratio and keep it looking manageable. But by fall, the colony's brood production is slowing as it transitions toward winter, meaning the bee population is contracting right as the mite population is at its highest point of the entire year. The ratio that looked fine all summer flips hard, and it flips exactly when it matters most. Here's the part that makes this specific mistake a guarantee rather than a risk. The bees your colony raises in this exact window are not ordinary bees. They're winter bees, physiologically distinct, built with larger fat bodies and a different internal chemistry, specifically so they can live 4 to 6 months instead of the usual 4 to 6 weeks. These winter bees are the entire mechanism by which your colony survives the cold. And Varroa mites specifically target the fat bodies of developing bees, which happens to be the exact tissue that makes a winter bee a winter bee. A mite feeding on a developing winter bee doesn't just weaken it. Research measuring mite-exposed pupae found something like a 21% reduction in flight capacity in the adults that emerge, along with a documented connection to deformed wing virus, which showed up in nearly 90% of colonies sampled from a recent catastrophic loss season. So if you don't count and the mite load is high, you are not gambling with your colony's survival. You are actively feeding the workforce that mites feed on at the exact moment those specific bees are being manufactured, guaranteeing that your winter cluster will be built from compromised, short-lived, virus-carrying bees instead of the fat, healthy ones that would have carried the colony through. The hive looks completely normal through this entire process. There is no external sign. The only way to know is a sugar roll or alcohol wash, a jar, some sugar, 10 minutes, giving you an actual number, mites per 100 bees. Heading into this window, most experienced beekeepers act at around 2 to 3 mites per 100 bees, and treat immediately if they're at or above that threshold, because the bees that matter most are being built right now, not next month. Mistake 2. Treating too late, even if you eventually treat at all. This is the mistake that catches beekeepers who think they've done everything right because they did do something. They just did it on the wrong side of a hard biological deadline. Here's the mechanism. A honeybee larva spends roughly 6 days uncapped before workers seal the cell with wax, and once capped, whatever mite load is in that cell at the moment of sealing is locked in with the developing bee for the rest of its pupal stage. There is no reaching into a capped cell to fix a mite problem after the fact. The decision is made the instant the wax goes on, and it cannot be undone. This means treatment timing isn't a loose window measured in sometime this fall. It's a hard deadline measured against when your specific colony's winter bees are being capped, which in a lot of climates falls in a narrow stretch in the middle of the season's transition, often mid to late August through September, depending on your region. But the principle holds everywhere the calendar shifts. Treat before that window closes and the mites are knocked down before the winter bees are sealed in, protecting the generation that matters. Treat 2 or 3 weeks after that window closes, and you have successfully reduced the mite population. You've done real, measurable work, but you've protected adult bees that were already fine while missing entirely the bees that were capped with a full mite load during the exact stretch you were still deciding whether to treat. This is the mistake that makes people feel like they did the responsible thing and still ends up guaranteeing a dead hive, because a treatment applied after the winter bees are capped provides a real, false sense of security. You treated, the number went down. But the damage to this year's winter cluster had already happened before the product ever went in the hive, and you won't find out until the cluster you thought you protected turns out to be built from bees that were compromised weeks before you acted. Quick word before I continue. Everything I've learned about fall timing, the exact windows, the thresholds, the deadlines that decide a colony's whole winter, I gathered it all into the Hive Vault at daleshive.com. The link's in the description below and on the channel page if you want it. This video's free and always will be. The Vault's just the long version for folks who want the whole thing. I won't mention it again. Mistake 3, not confirming stores and feeding blind, or not feeding at all because the colony looked heavy enough. This is the mistake that sneaks up on beekeepers who did everything right on the mite front, because it's an entirely separate failure mode that can kill a mite-healthy colony just as completely as Varroa kills an untreated one. Here's why guessing at stores is fatal rather than just risky. A colony's honey stores need to last through the entire dormant period, and in many regions that's a stretch of months with little to no opportunity to supplement once true cold sets in and the cluster can no longer break to reach food that's out of immediate range. A colony that goes into winter with inadequate stores, or with stores positioned wrong in the box so the cluster can't physically reach them as it moves through winter, doesn't fail gradually in a way you can catch and correct. It runs out, and by the time it's visibly a problem, you're often looking at a hive in the depths of winter that you cannot meaningfully help without risking the cluster's survival just by opening it in the cold. The guessing happens because a colony that had a strong summer often looks like it should have plenty stored, and eyeballing a box from the outside is a genuinely unreliable way to judge weight. Hefting the hive, physically lifting the back of it, and feeling the resistance is the actual method experienced beekeepers use, and it takes 10 seconds. A colony that feels alarmingly light needs feeding immediately, inside the hive rather than in the open yard, because open feeding during a dearth is exactly the kind of decision that triggers robbing, where desperate foragers from struggling colonies nearby raid your hive, potentially overwhelming it and carrying their own mite problems home with them in the process. The guarantee here comes from combining "I didn't check" with "there's nothing you can do to fix it" once deep winter arrives. Unlike the mite window, which at least gives you a defined stretch of weeks to act in, inadequate stores discovered in January are often simply unfixable in any meaningful way. The window to correct this mistake is fall, full stop, which is exactly why it belongs on this list of fall mistakes rather than a general winter prep list. Here's what ties these three together, and why I'm calling them guarantees rather than risk factors. Each one attacks a completely different piece of the same survival mechanism at the same time of year, and each one is invisible until it's too late to fix. Skip the mite count, and you guarantee your winter bees are compromised before they're even born, weeks before the visible symptoms would ever show up. Treat late, and you guarantee the same outcome even though you did something, because the deadline that mattered had already passed. Skip the stores check, and you guarantee a colony that runs out of food in a season where there's no way to correct course once deep cold sets in. None of these three mistakes announces itself. A colony carrying all three of these fall failures at once can look, in October, exactly as strong and calm as the colony next door that has none of them. That's what makes fall the month that actually decides winter, rather than winter itself. Every visible sign lags weeks or months behind the actual decision, and by the time the entrance goes quiet in January, the outcome was locked in back when the hive still looked completely fine. Here's what to do instead of each one, laid out plainly. Instead of judging by appearance, count a sugar roll or alcohol wash on a sample from the brood nest, giving you mites per 100 bees. Do it now if you haven't done it recently, and act immediately if the number is at or above roughly 2 to 3 per 100 heading into this window. Instead of treating whenever it's convenient, treat before your winter bees are capped, not after. Work backward from when your region's winter bees are being raised, and get any needed treatment done before that window closes, not sometime vaguely this fall. Instead of assuming stores are adequate, heft every hive, 10 seconds per colony, lifting the back and feeling the resistance. Feed immediately, inside the box, any colony that feels light, and do it now, while there's still time for the colony to process and store what you give it before true cold arrives. Picture a fall where none of these 3 mistakes happen. You count mites through this window rather than guessing, and you act on the number, not the calendar, and not on how the hive looks. You treat before the winter bees are capped, not after, so the generation that actually carries the colony through the cold develops clean instead of compromised. You heft every box, feed the light ones now while there's still time, and you go into winter knowing rather than hoping. And in a season where recent years have seen national winter losses climb past 40%, the worst on record, your colony isn't part of that number, not because you got lucky, but because you didn't make any of the 3 specific mistakes that guarantee the outcome the beekeeper down the road is about to discover in his own quiet, dead box come January. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 3 you've made without realizing it, and whether this changes what you do in the next couple of weeks. I read every single one at Dale's Hive. And if you want the complete fall survival checklist laid out week by week, thresholds and deadlines included, it's waiting in the vault at daleshive.com. Link in the description. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week we're covering exactly how to raise the fattest, healthiest winter bees possible, once you've made sure these 3 mistakes aren't standing in the way. 3 mistakes, each one invisible. Each one, made in fall, guarantees a dead hive by winter's end. Now you know all 3, and exactly what to do instead, while there's still time to do it.